Bismillahi walhamdulillahi wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. We begin the second session in the marriage preparation course based on the book Before You Tie the Knot, meaning before you make the marital contract. We are in chapter 1, and chapter 1 is dealing with the Quranic model of marriage. We said we were going to take a few sessions to deal with this idea. Now, chapter 1, it begins with an ayah of the Quran, and that ayah of the Quran talks about how it is that the human being, male and female, come from the same origin. And from the relationship between males and females, between the male and female that are bonded together, you have family, and from family comes nations and tribes and so on and so forth. And one of the end points, one of the objectives is the idea of ta'arruf, so that you may come to know one another. So this section is indicating to us that there's compatibility between the male and the female. And that compatibility, we know that it exists because of the Quranic teaching with regard to the origin of the male and the female. And both male and female, because they come from the same origin, are established in dignity, and in this there's equality. Both come from Allah, both have equal value before Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala as human beings. Now, they may differ with regard to their relationship with Allah. One person may have a higher rank than the other person. They differ with each other from the angle that males have their distinct attributes and qualities, and females have their distinct attributes and qualities. And in Islam, there is an understanding of roles and responsibilities in which people cooperate with one another in order to establish their relationship, and they even in that regard vary. And the ayah of the Quran follows up that reality that despite there being diversity between males and females in certain points or differences, verily the most honored of you in the sight of Allah is the one that is most righteous. Atqakum. And so what we find, this section is introducing to us this idea that women and men are compatible. Women and men share differences, and they also share diversity, and the differences are very real. Biological differences exist between males and females, and certain other realities we find as well. But at the same time, there's some things in which they're the same, and they may just be diverse. They just may have a different type of personality, and so on and so forth. So some things actually distinguish or make very clear to us that males and females are different. But at the core, we find that the origin of the male and the female, it is with Allah. It is the reality that male and female are compatible. And from that relationship between males and females comes what? It comes the idea of nations and tribes. And that's where we begin to see more and more diversity emerge between peoples. But their origin is the same. And then the Quran talks to us about that diversity as not being a problem, but enjoins upon us to come to understand one another. If people come from different family backgrounds and tribes, they have different cultural realities, different experiences. So that diversity that people have, it could become a problem if they don't understand each other. And so the Quran in this context is also giving us the teaching that the male and the female that come from different backgrounds, although they may be compatible and they may be able to come into a relationship with one another that will produce children and so on and so forth, they still have to come to know one another, right? And they have to come to know one another so that they can function in a manner which is suitable to that relationship that they are trying to form, if we're talking about the marriage bond. And then the Quran lays down a new idea that was not known in the society, the Arabian Peninsula, and that is that it draws equality between people in terms of their dignity. And then it says the male and the female, they are established in dignity, but what will change them in ranking is those who have the best, strongest relationship with Allah Ta'ala. So they're not, their bestness or who superiority, so to speak, is not rooted in that I am a male, so males are superior over women, or vice versa, or I am rich, so I'm superior over you, or I come from this family. None of those things then is to be regarded as making someone superior over another person inherently. But what gives a person station and rank is their relationship with Allah Ta'ala. So that's the Quranic framework that is being introduced at this point. The idea at the core being that males and females, when they go to establish a marital relationship, have to have an understanding that they come from distinct backgrounds. And so the Quran enjoins the issue of ta'arruf, the issue of coming to understand each other, the issue of respecting each other's differences, and the issue of learning how to work with each other despite the diversity that may exist, because at the core, the reality is that males and females, they are made for one another. Now the issue becomes, is there compatibility, right, between two people that exists that will allow for a successful bonding to take place. And that's part of the idea of making sure that you vet or you understand the person that it is that you are seeking to enter into a marital relationship with. And of course, there's certain things that you're not going to know except after marriage, but the basics have to be in place. And so that diversity that exists between males and females, and those differences that exist, they are to be understood in the Quranic framework, right? And the Quran tells us that we should come to know one another. That's followed up by describing the relationship between male and female, right? That وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. So here we find that the Quran is telling us that from the signs of Allah is that He created from the same origin spouses, pairs, a partner, so that we can live in tranquility between ourselves in love and mercy, that love and mercy is placed by Allah in that relationship. And that's a sign for those people who reflect. That's a sign for those people who reflect. That's a rough translation. A more detailed translation from the signs of Allah is that He created for you mates from among yourselves that you may dwell in tranquility with them. And he has put love and mercy between your hearts. And indeed, in that are signs for those who reflect, or for people that reflects. The ayat that follows is the ayat that talks about the role of the male and the female in terms of the relationship. So the first thing that we see is the importance of coming to know one another, because we come from backgrounds in which there's differences and there's diversity of experiences, of outlook, everything that comes into play in that regard. And there's actual differences between males and females. It's not just a matter of diversity or different, an experience, which we can say you have one experience, I have another experience. There's actual real differences, because we can both live in the same city. You know what I'm saying? And my experience will be different than yours, but we can maybe learn to have the same understanding about life in the city. But when it comes to the issue of me understanding as a male what birth is like for a female, I will never understand that, because that's something that I can't engage in. I can maybe understand it intellectually, but not at the core, not at the same experience as a woman. So that's an actual difference. So here, the Quran, after establishing the idea of ta'arruf, the point that comes up now is that the Quran is being selected in this book, in this chapter, to talk about the relationship of the man and the woman being as a garment, right? And so that comes in the context of saying that the goal of marriage is tranquility. And that with that tranquility, if we pick someone that we have come to know, which we have compatibility with that person, that relationship should be one of tranquility, and we should expect that Allah places love and mercy between us in that relationship, or between the hearts, so to speak. I want to say this again. That firstly, the book in the introduction is starting off with this idea of diversity, and this idea that the origin of the male and the female is that both of them are from the creation of Allah, and they were made for each other in pairs. In other words, males and females can come together in a relationship. They're not at war with one another. There is compatibility and mutuality. Now, the idea that comes is that we have to discover if there's compatibility at the level of personality, and being able to communicate and being able to come together to build the relationship. But at the biological level, at the creation level, at the level of life itself, males and females are made for each other. That's our understanding as Muslims. And so how we overcome the differences that may exist between a male and a female, we have to learn about each other. So learning about each other is essential. About each other as males and females, and about each other in terms of people, human beings that have come from different experiences, different realities. Then, secondly, the principle from the Quran that's laid out in this chapter is that the relationship between the male and the female has an objective. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. That the male and the female, one of the primary objectives outside of being people of taqwa is to live in tranquility with each other. And Allah Ta'ala states that He puts mercy, He puts love and mercy between the hearts in that bond. And that's when we have healthy relationships. And then the relationship is described as Hunna libasun lakum wa antum libasun lahum. That they, women, are garments, they are your garments, and you men are their garments. So there's compatibility and mutuality at another level here. And the symbolism of garments is that the garment provides a barrier from people being able to see our faults. We cover each other over and we provide a protection for each other and the support. And we also beautify our lives by our engagement with each other. And we already saw that the foundation of the relationship is tranquility. And so then now you begin to see how the Quran talks about Muslim marriage as having other realities that are fulfilled, like the need for support, the need for recognition and love and acceptance. And we have in psychology the idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the basic foundation, human beings need food, clothing, and shelter. And then at a higher level, safety. And then at a higher level, love and belonging and recognition and esteem. And then the idea is that with that foundation in place, growth uh, should be something that we should be aiming at, or to be the best human being. In other words, to aim at ihsan. And so I've taken the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and instead of saying self-actualization, just to say ihsan or growth, to be the best at every level possible. And so even in a relationship is the same thing. A relationship, in order for it to be functional, it needs the basic أساسيات الحياة ومتطلبات الحياة, which are food, clothing, and shelter, so on and so forth. And people need to feel trust and feel that they're safe. They need to feel love and that they belong. They need to be valued. And then that relationship grows. So when that couple engages in those types of practices, we find growth. And so the issue of libas, the idea of libas, or a garment, the concept of garment, of male and female being garments for one another, tells us that that relationship should be one in which there's a bonding between the male and the female, and there's the possibility of people being stable in that relationship and growing, right, and growing properly, right. And so we find that women were introduced first in the ayah, right? Hunna libasun lakum, and before men, and this brought about a revolutionary understanding in a society which was male dominated. The Quran mentions women first to show men that they need women and to elevate the status of women, right? In a society in which women many times had no rights, or at times they were even being aborted and buried alive. And so the Quran is reminding us of the status of women in the relationship. And also the Quran is reminding us of mutuality between males and females, how they should be there for each other emotionally. They should be there for each other physically and materially and physiologically. And what I mean by physiologically, I'm talking about in the sense of, marriage involves sexual intimacy. So all of those things come within the context of the idea of mutuality, how males and females have to be support for each other. That's something that has to be learned. And we want to close with the idea that there's another aspect to clothing. The Quran says, وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ. The garment of taqwa, the idea of taqwa, or the idea of establishing the values of Allah in a relationship, is where there is goodness. Is where there is goodness. And the Quran says, ذَلِكَ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ يَذَكَّرُونَ. And that is from the signs of Allah, so that you be mindful and conscious. That a marriage, we can take from this, inshallah, that a marriage without the relationship with Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is devoid. You can have A functional marriage on other levels have a good emotional relationship, take care of each other and protect each other, support each other materially, have a good sexual relationship. But that relationship that is devoid of the couple working with each other to cultivate and develop their alliance to Allah wa ta'ala is one which is devoid of goodness, one which is extremely deficient, and that's not the concept of Muslim marriage. Muslim marriage includes everything that needs to be included in order to establish a healthy relationship, everything that is good, those things which are clearly spelled out in the Quran and the Sunnah, and those things which we learn by research, because we don't know everything about relationships. There's things that we learn along the way because in society we're changing, and that's the idea of libas as well, that as we change, or the idea of garment, that as we change seasons, as we grow, we mature, either the different stages of life that we're going through, or as society changes, that we learn how to be garments for one another. We learn how to protect each other. We learn how to adapt. We learn how to secure each other. We learn how to connect with each other, right? And that's the function of a garment, or being garments for each other, that we're looking out for each other. And so that adaptation that we find even with clothing, when we go from season to season, that also has to take place in the relationship. That we have to always look to see how it is that we can protect the relationship, and by default, and if we're going to protect the relationship, we also have to grow the relationship, or it dies. So with that, we end, and we will continue next week with the Quranic model for relationship. We said that we're going to extend out chapter 1 and kind of flush out some of the ideas that are there, and get a Quranic framework for how we understand relationships before we go into the next chapter, which deals with selecting a spouse, which is chapter 2. And so with that, we leave you with Allah wa ta'ala, and we ask Allah wa ta'ala for guidance and facility in all of it. We ask Allah wa ta'ala for guidance and facility in all of our affairs, and we leave you with the greeting of Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.